الأستاذ عادل أفيوني بس يتفضل على المسرح. عادل أفيوني.
سنبدأ الجلسة الثانية التي تركز حول خيارات التمويل لمشاريع الشراكة، ويترأس الجلسة الأستاذ عادل أفيوني عضو مجلس الإدارة في Lebanese International Finance Executive.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everyone. I would like first to start by thanking the organizers today. This is a very important day as we launch as a country and government an ambitious and strategic investment plan that is much needed. So I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me on behalf of the Lebanese International Finance Executive Association to moderate this important panel. Ladies and gentlemen, this morning we heard from senior decision makers in government about the government's plan to launch an infrastructure investment program. And we heard about some interesting projects and attractive opportunities. This plan is strategic for the country, is ambitious, and is obviously indispensable. It is indispensable first because we, as a country, need to upgrade our infrastructure and invest in infrastructure. As we all know, we've had very little of such investments for the last 2 decades at least. But it's also indispensable because our economy is in dire need for stimulus package and for growth. And the CIP, as it was presented this morning, is a crucial solution triggered by the government in order to stimulate economic activity and bring business opportunities to the private and the public sector and create jobs at a time where we need that. So all this is great, but as we all know as well, the public finances are in challenging situation. And the government and the public sector cannot afford, to put it bluntly, to invest and to deploy heavily in those infrastructure plans. Therefore, the solution, obviously, as we've seen in other countries, is private capital and the private sector. And as was highlighted earlier today by Prime Minister Halili and all the other speakers. And that's why we're here today on this panel. We have representatives from various international and local institutions which are capital providers and which are needed if we want this plan to succeed. And our objective in this panel for the next 9 minutes is to hear from those institutions about their views, about what they do and how they operate, their views about this ambitious program, how do they plan to support that, and obviously what are the conditions attached to such support. And what we'd like to take away from our panel is how can we maximize the amount of capital we raise under the PPP plans for those infrastructure projects, and how can we optimize in terms of cost and diversity the capital support. And this is very important for the country. It's the first time we embark on such an ambitious plan, the first time we embark on an ambitious plan where we use private capital. Therefore, it will set the stage for a transformation in the way our markets operate and our funding works and our economy grows. So I'd like to thank everybody here for attending and our panelists. Let me first start by introducing them, and then we will start by a presentation by each one of the panelists providing feedback about the projects, but also presenting the way they operate, and then obviously we'll open it for debate and discussion. So we have to my left Mr. Saad Sabra, who's to the extreme left, Lebanon country head for the IFC from the World Bank Group. Mr. Matthew Jordan Tank, head of infrastructure policy and project preparation for the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. To my right, Mr. Jean Riachi, who's the chairman and CEO of FFA Private Bank. And then to his right, Mrs. Layali Abdin, Senior Underwriter for MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. And then to the extreme right, Mr. Francesco Totaro, Investment Officer for the EIB. So as you can see, we have great representations from some of the major and most high-profile organizations internationally and locally who are here to show their support, but also share their views with the audience. So let me start first maybe with Jean, because he can set the stage as the local representative of the investment community and the finance community in Lebanon.
Good afternoon. I have a PowerPoint presentation. Okay. I'll do it this way. So my name is Jean Riachi. I'm the CEO of FFA Private Bank. And we have been advocating for investment, private investment in infrastructure for many months now. And I'm very happy that the government is taking this step. I would like to thank the organizers, Al-Iktissad Wal-Aamal, the Office of the Prime Minister, and I hope something will be done in the future. Sorry. I'm not very good at technology. Okay. Conundrum for the French-speaking people, problématique. Conundrum. First, Lebanon needs the money to finance PPP, and this is the topic of this afternoon session. Second, Lebanon has limited available liquidity in its banking sector. Maybe it is not very easy when you read the papers. You see that Lebanese banks are very liquid, but in fact they're not for many technical reasons. Lebanese government cannot take on more debt. I think this is obvious for everybody. And Lebanon needs foreign money to balance its deficit, especially we have a structural problem, deficit of balance of payment, and we believe infrastructure is one good way to solve the solution. In conclusion, Lebanon needs to raise private and fresh money for PPP projects. Private money, FDIs, money require, one, attractive returns. Investors do not invest if they don't have the adequate returns. Second, they need proper structuring and risk mitigation, and we'll talk about how we can mitigate risk, for example, with insurance policies such as the MIGA ones. And third, we need adequate governance and transparent framework. All this will result in substantial benefits. Attractive return, how can we achieve that? First, we need the proper structuring and trenching. Some people want low risk and lower return. Some people accept higher risk and higher return. We need different seniority levels, etc. We need favorable tax treatment in order to improve project returns. And we also need, of course, optimal operation and maintenance expenses. Proper structuring and risk mitigation is achieved, in our view, through ring-fencing the assets away from any claim of any party, especially in countries like Lebanon. You can have claims coming from anywhere. You really need to ring-fence the assets. The segregation of ownership and operation, it's not obvious, it doesn't happen all the time, but we think it might be a good solution to have ownership separated from operation. We might explain more later in this session. Bankruptcy remoteness, of course, and we need swift out-of-court enforcement process, because as you know, the judiciary in Lebanon is not very efficient. This is the least you can say. Adequate governance and transparent framework is achieved through using properly structured SPVs, and Lebanese laws allow for this. We'll explain more. Autopilot administration of the assets in case of segregation between assets and operation. Of course, no conflict of interest between owner, operator, and contractor. And very importantly, reporting obligations to investors, and it's better if it's required by law. Substantial benefits are, we're not saying that local banks, although they don't have the liquidity, that meaning it's going to be difficult for them to finance these projects through their balance sheet, but they have access to money, and they could also play a very active role in raising money for those projects on an agency basis, and also they could participate in their balance sheet, because if we use, for example, securitization, meaning it's not bilateral loans but securities that are issued, banks of course can buy them for their own balance sheet. Very importantly, ensuring equal investment opportunity to local constituents. And here we're talking about what the governor was saying this morning, capital markets in Lebanon. People can invest and should be allowed to invest in those projects. So again, we need to issue the proper securities. Same thing for the diaspora. How to attract the diaspora? By allowing them to invest in securities, in these projects through securities, and even preferably if these securities can be traded and held in bank accounts outside Lebanon. This is what we call Euro-clearable. This will also waive the suspicion of corruption, because if this opportunity is open to the public, it means that everybody can benefit and not only a small group of insiders. Ensuring the continuity of public service is when we advocate for segregation between assets ownership and operation. This will allow to ensure the continuity of public service in case of litigation or disagreement with the operator. I'll give you an example. We had, those cellular companies. The government had to negotiate the repurchase of the assets, and it was a lengthy process. Same thing with Suclean. I mean, this is a good solution to alleviate this problem. We believe that reverting to structured finance to finance PPP is very much in line with the PPP law, and it's even enshrined in the law under Article 16. And I think that Mr. Ziad Hayek mentioned this this morning. And by the way, the law itself says, the PPP law says that the financial structure of the project is also something that the High Council will look at very closely. So not only the technical aspects. I would like to go through a few charts. You all know that the ratio of debt to GDP is very high. You know that the deficit is the annual deficit, budget deficit relative to GDP is above 10%, which is huge. So this is to make our case that the government cannot invest in infrastructure. Look at what happened with government spending for infrastructure. Almost nothing. The government did not invest in infrastructure, and we are feeling the pain today. We don't have the basic infrastructure. And talking about FDI are very important for the country. In the past, it went almost 50% went to the real estate sector and nothing to productive sector. We really believe that FDIs going into infrastructure are productive FDIs that will help the country's competitivity and long-term growth. Capital inflows, as you can see in this chart, are becoming really a big issue for the country. I'll go through comparisons of the different laws that we can use to structure vehicles to invest in the projects under the PPP law, of course. SPVs, how do you create SPVs? You can create an SPV under Law 705, which is the securitization law. It is very efficient, while creating companies under the corporate law might prove very painful. How much time do we have? We're fine? Thank you. You want me to continue? Why it's not, it has many reasons, we will explain them to you. Okay, about equal investment opportunities, meaning offering the public to subscribe into securities issued by the structure that own the project. The idea is to allow the general public to invest. Okay, it is very, of course, achievable through the securitization law, by definition, by design. It's called securitization, meaning you issue securities. Achievable, more complicated under the fiduciary law 520. Achievable by, you can issue securities if you are an SAL, but those who work in Lebanon know that there are many constraints. And second, the governance is not well guaranteed by the Code of Commerce, and certainly not up to international standards. So we don't believe it's the good solution. Maturity, mismatching, and liquidity. PPP projects are long-term. We said that the banks, through bilateral loans, might have some issues, while if they invest in securities, they could underwrite, they could buy it for trading. They could buy it and sell it to their clients and promote the securities to their clients. So again, the banks can play a big role, but we believe this role should be more on the agency side than on the balance sheet side. Just one point, for example, in the corporate law, an SAL can issue bonds for only 3 times its nominal capital. And you cannot do tranching, while if you use the securitization law, you can do as many tranches as you want with all the features that you want, interest, guarantees, seniority, whatever, which is not available under corporate law. Of course, attractiveness to investment diaspora securitization is much better. The enforced governance is by design in the securitization law. It is not very well designed for SALs, for example, because the minority rights, the reporting obligations are not really very efficient under the Code of Commerce. Corruption, as we said, if the investment is offered to the public through the markets, through marketable securities, the suspicion of corruption will be less present. While most of the PPPs that we've seen in the past, we've seen a small group of investors, very well connected. Everybody is suspicious. It shouldn't be the case in the future. Well, I think, what else? Okay, again, by using the securitization law, you can tailor the instruments the way you want, because as you will see, we'll have many kinds of, many sorts of investors. We'll have the multilaterals, we'll have the development funds, we will have the general public, we'll have private investors owning equity and public investors owning equities. They all have different needs and different level of requirement in terms of seniority. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Keely, this is to be here. It's a real honor to address this audience about a very important topic. I am the manager of our project preparation facility at EBRD based in London, and I also work quite a bit on infrastructure policy, so I'll speak with both hats today. Firstly, let me thank the High Council for Privatization and PPPs for inviting EBRD. As many of you know, we're quite new to the country. We've only really had a presence here for about 6 months. So we're very, very interested and eager to become involved in the infrastructure sector. What I'll do is just in a couple of minutes run through PPPs and our experience to introduce you a little bit to EBRD and our approach. I'll talk to you about our project preparation facility, the architecture of it, how it's working, why we think that's important, and then specifically go a little bit deeper into risk mitigation, which I think for many of you, the investors in the room, is something that's at the top of your mind, how to come into these projects with an appropriate risk allocation. So, going through. EBRD has, as I'm sure those who know a bit about the institution, we have an orientation towards the private sector. We've done over 50 PPPs, participated in financing in the last 20 or so years. Roads, facilities management, rail, hospitals, airports, wastewater. We cover a fairly broad spectrum. Within that, I thought it was important to show you that the bank, whilst we are a development institution, we really specialize in private sector, sub-sovereign, almost what one would call corporate utility lending, with private sector principles, private sector pricing. Only about a third of our projects in the infrastructure area are the standard traditional sovereign lending. The rest really is the sub-sovereign space, municipalities, utilities, state-owned enterprises, and indeed PPPs. Now, key lessons learned from our experience. I mean, the first thing to explain is that we're talking about here this realm of PPPs, which is a whole spectrum ranging from management contracts, and then building from there in the kind of alphabet soup of design build, DBOM, DBFOM, DBFOMT, and BOO, BOT, etc. And as you build up, you're going from essentially, this slide is trying to show how the private sector increases its operational involvement as you move up the chain, but also its investment level, so on the bottom axis. Now the vertical axis, I want to show that risk as you move up that chain of PPPs, risk also increases for the private sector. And with that risk, it's often accompanied by a longer term engagement. So there's a longer term duration to the contract. So this is what happens as you build up experience and you go for deeper and deeper private sector involvement. Very quickly, the EBRD approach, if you will, is typically we start with a kind of a planning framework, support at the planning level, and usually we do in the very early days of many of our countries 20 years ago, it was sovereign lending. That was all that was allowed to be done. That was what the legal framework allowed. We then moved with them into sub-sovereign lending with perhaps a sovereign guarantee. Then we moved to straight sub-sovereign without a sovereign guarantee. And then we got into a commercialized environment where tariffs and user charges and full sort of support with robust availability payment mechanisms, etc., allows one to then structure full PPPs at long-term duration. So it's that kind of pyramid. And what's interesting, just for a pause, if you look around the world, countries, even countries that are very mature in their PPP environments, take the UK for example, or Australia, really it's that top end of 10 to 15% of total investment which is being done as PPPs. The rest still is sub-sovereign or public sector sovereign. So it's important to keep the kind of balance in mind. Now, what are the key questions? I think there are sort of, well, there's many reasons, many issues to keep in mind, but three jump out always again and again for me. One, is the project that you're trying to do essential for the economy, for the society? So with essentiality comes political will. And when you have those in place, it's a much stronger, you have a much higher possibility of having that PPP be successful over the long term. Secondly, is there value for money versus the public sector alternative? What I mean by that is that, without getting too technical, but there's a value of the risk transfer from the public sector to the private sector, and that value can be monetized in the assessment. So apples to apples, is there on a net present value basis enough of a benefit of doing it as a PPP to outweigh the increased financing costs of the PPP structure versus the public sector alternative? So you've got to go through that exercise to really be sure that this is worth doing. Not all projects are justified on a value for money basis. So, and finally, can you afford it? And if you can afford it, is there going to be political will and will at the willingness to pay by users and taxpayers? If there is, it's something that you should do, but you need to do that double check to make sure. Now, the IPPF, this facility, 40 million euros from our net profits. We put into a fund. We created a unit, which I manage at EBRD, and it's designed to provide efficient mobilization of PPP and other public sector projects for the benefit of our client, of our public sector clients. So we have various windows. I'm going to talk about the PPP window here, which is essentially, this is the efficiency and the quality game. We pre-selected 3 years ago 4 consortia from over 200 companies who applied to get onto this 40 million euro framework. Intense competition, big international tender. These 4 are our framework consultants. So when we get a mandate to work with a public sector agency around our region, we do a secondary selection to select one of these 4, and then they mobilize in 8 weeks. So it doesn't matter if it's 2 million euros worth of support from EBRD, from this facility. They will be on the ground in 8 weeks, and that's our value proposition to our clients. What have we done since we started this 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago? We have 6 PPPs under mandate. It started in Egypt with a dry port, a logistics center southwest of Cairo. Belarus, which is the first ever PPP, the M10 motorway. Then we moved to Sofia Airport, which we're doing jointly with IFC, our partners, IFC Advisory in Sofia. Then 2 Ukrainian PPPs for the port sector, also jointly with IFC. Then finally, Market Airport as a second airport. Very quickly, I want to just leave this with you, and I'm happy to send it to you so you can study it in more detail if you're interested. But we do the PPPs on a reimbursable basis with a fee, with a small fee. We do this because, and when I mean reimbursable, it means that at the end of the process, there's a financial award following the PPP tender. That winning sponsor, that winning concessionaire, is obliged to reimburse EBRD's IPPF. And the reason for this is that we can make this fund revolving and sustainable. We can reinvest in the second PPP here in Lebanon or in any country where we're working. And there's also a small transaction support fee. That's really to just get real buy-in from our public sector clients. That also can be reimbursed back to the public sector in that case. Now, one final moment before I jump to risk mitigation. I think that these PPFs, these facilities from the MDBs, there have been 5 or 6 new PPFs created in the last couple of years. They're wonderful. They're great. You should utilize them. That's my job to help promote them. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this has to be a partnership with national governments to create their own project preparation facilities with their own money, with their own teams, and we work jointly together. Having international people come in and they have great experience base, but ultimately the sustainability of this is when countries themselves invest in this activity. And from what I heard this morning, there's a lot of really good planning and thinking going on here in Lebanon, which is encouraging. Now, innovating on risk mitigation. I hope you can see that okay. Yeah, it's a bit small, but I'll walk you through it. Having said all of this about project preparation, we realize that there's a challenge here, which is, and it was alluded to this morning, we need fresh money into the sector. There is a lot of money sitting on the sidelines in the form of institutional capital, institutional investors, insurance companies, pension funds, and this is global, something like $50 trillion under assets under management. If more of that money can get involved in emerging market infrastructure, that would be a huge step in trying to close the infrastructure gap. tried to come up with a mechanism, and we sat down with the sponsor in Turkey, and I'll get to the specific example. We tried to understand what they would need to get it more involved, more deeply in investing in the Turkish PPP sector, as that example was in front of us. So we sat down, again, with our partners to the right, with MIGA, and we devised a product which would essentially help those institutional investors become more comfortable in a project bond structure. So this wasn't debt, it was bond, it was a bond issuance. And what we did essentially was, because there is a risk during construction in any greenfield construction, and there's ongoing operational risk in PPPs if the governments are obliged to pay an availability payment for 25, 30 years, some investors will wonder if that's really going to be stable government to government as things move on. We decided that what was needed was a subordinated liquidity facility to provide cash in the event that there's a hiccup and some sort of delay in the payment from the public sector, say the Ministry of Health, to that sponsor after they've built a hospital. And this was the exact case. So these liquidity facilities, we call them the construction support and the revenue support facilities, provided essentially around $90 million of standby liquidity that can be used and dispersed very quickly whilst the project is solving its problems. If there's a dispute, an international arbitration process is invoked, which takes 3 to 4 years to go through the whole process of an arbitral award. In the interim period, we provide liquidity to that sponsor, and that sponsor then can make timely and as scheduled payments to the bondholders. It may sound a bit complicated, but I can tell you that, and there's a lot of detail here, which I won't go in for the interest of time, I won't go into, but essentially the net effect was this. The rating agency, Moody's, who was looking at this project before the risk mitigation instrument was applied, they essentially looked at the product and they said, listen, if the government's supposed to pay availability, we'll rate this at the sovereign rating of Turkey, which was, I think at the time, 2 notches below investment grade. That's not good enough for institutional investors. If you want them to get into this, they can only invest for fiduciary reasons in investment grade paper. So what happened is we applied this liquidity facility, which worked with MIGA's political risk insurance, combined the two, and it provided enough support so that Moody's re-rated the project 2 notches above the sovereign rating, the sovereign ceiling, getting it up to investment grade, and therefore allowing a much wider pool of investors to get involved. So this was don't want to sort of overstate it, but we think that this is something that is sort of groundbreaking. If this could be replicated in any number of countries around the world that are 2 to 3 notches below investment grade, it could be done for many types of projects. It could be done not just for bonds, but also debt financing, and we'd love to be able to structure those types of that type of structure, that risk mitigation product for other PPPs. So I'll stop there. I went into some detail, but happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That was also a very important perspective, because as you mentioned, the EBRD is often great support, not only financially, but in terms of providing the confidence for other investors and the structural features that allow other investors to come in. And I think that's a theme that we're going to discuss throughout the session, i.e. what we have today, as I mentioned earlier, is representatives from organizations who can provide funding and support. But again, let's all remember that we're talking about 6 to 7 billion at least of private funding that we need for those projects. So there is a gap, like in any other emerging market country. And what we want to make sure is, with the support from the key multinationals, we can fill that gap from the pool of capital available that is affected private institutional investors. Let me now move to the IFC, which is, again, the investment arm of the World Bank. And Saad, if you don't mind introducing yourself and going through your presentation.
think there's a presentation as well. Okay, great. Thank you very, very much, Adel. This is an honor and a privilege to be part of this very important event. So I'm Saad Sabra. I'm actually the head of IFC in Lebanon, covering all IFC activities in the country, including the very important and high priority sector for us, which is the overall spectrum in the infrastructure development in Lebanon. What I would like to do today is build a little bit on what was presented by my colleague from EBRD and sort of demonstrate the experience that we have in Lebanon in infrastructure development, but more or less around the PPP notion. And this is also building on the type of interactions we've had in the country over the years with counterparts from the government, particularly colleagues from the HCP PPP. So as mentioned, the World Bank Group, IFC, stands out as the private sector arm, and it sits along a structure of agencies that are established to help and support emerging markets and developing countries around the world. While the IFC is focused on the private sector, we have other agencies like IBRD that does public finance, and then MIGA, my colleague is here, and then there's IDA that works with below poverty line countries, and there's the Agency for Dispute Resolutions. Altogether, as the World Bank Group, have been recently mandated to work jointly to maximize finance for development. So how do you do that, and how does it work in the context of infrastructure development? So while the IFC's initial mandate was to provide funding for private sector projects across different sectors, in the infrastructure arena, the gap was noticed that there is much to be done to work on allowing governments and the public sector to provide space for the private sector to work in infrastructure projects. And so the innovating aspect of advisory services in public-private partnerships was established as part of the mandate that allows the IFC to then allow space for financing projects in infrastructure. And in that front, I wanted to show you a little bit why and how does IFC advisory services and PPP works, and in that it comes along a spectrum of activities which finally allows IFC investments to come in and to mobilize finance from the private sector. But the ultimate arena is to build a regulatory framework to allow the government to work in close hands with the private sector to achieve a level of performance and sustainability in terms of project development in infrastructure, but also gives the government the space to be able to conduct more monitoring and supervision on projects that are key to the economy development and job creation. And at the same time, ultimately provide space for project finance. And here I'm highlighting in red on the slide that it will, for this, it provides the opportunity to mobilize sources and new sources of finance to these projects, and then providing credit enhancements to these type of projects that are key, again, to the development of these countries. So the space of minimizing the gap between the public and the private sector is where the advisory services comes in. Of course, on the right-hand side of the slide, we try to show you a little bit about why this is an additionality to both the public and the private sector. Hereby, and so how do we propose public-private partnership advisory? And the idea is, again, to provide the linkages from both sides, from the public and the private sector. And hereby, the role of the government is to maintain the regulatory role and to actually maintain the supervision and monitoring of the public interest goals, and then also monitor the quality of services that these projects are alleged to offer. But ultimately, the risk in this case is more transferred to the private sector. Through the IFC advisory services and PPPs, the project or the private sector is now given the opportunity to maintain a very important role of providing the service and managing the service in the most efficient way. This just shows you a little bit of our experience in the region. And in the context of MENA, we've been able, through IFC, through PPP advisory services, to mobilize projects that have created financing space in the amount of $2.7 billion of new or fresh money into these markets, utilized to the private sector. And these projects have actually provided services to the population of over 29 million people, and also has a very key impact in terms of the emissions and sort of carbon reduction around these countries. And here we're looking, I mean, we have, as highlighted, a number of projects that have been completed in various sectors, whether transport, whether electricity, and also in the sectors of services. In Lebanon, as you can see, we are eyeing and hopefully will be starting very soon the advisory services project on the IPPs, but also are eyeing projects in other key sectors. So, how is PPP a win-win for all stakeholders, in this case, the public and private? I wanted to show, and I think this was dwelled a little bit from our colleagues from EBRD, that the ultimate purpose or the ultimate options for PPP projects usually takes into account two types of aspects. So how do you transfer the risk and control of these projects from the public to the private sector over a duration of time? As you can see in this slide on the left-hand side, the types of PPP projects that involve as small durations of periods involving technical assistance or service contracts or management contracts or lease contracts, where ultimately the risk that is transferred to the private sector is minimum, but the projects still involve a good level of public participation. In this case, the social projects like health, education, and also transport projects can be a bit more in this space. And then as the duration of these contracts become longer, the risk is transferred fully to the private sector, and hereby, where the risk is transferred to the private sector, the mitigation for the allocation of finance is much more complicated. And more on that front, projects in power sector and in upstream are more relevant. But generally speaking, the question that always comes in mind, why PPPs and has PPPs worked? The answer to that is not every PPP is a success project. There are stories out there with failure PPP projects, but why PPPs in the context of a country like Lebanon? I'll come to that a little bit later, but then this is the general notation. Again, the first thing is to transfer the risk to the private sector. It's important to allow the private sector to take the full risk, and that how does the project become bankable to the private sector, where you can manage that risk? Incentives have to be provided to the private sector to allow them to actually go out and actually allocate the needed financing for this. But then the general benefit from PPPs is you allow countries to actually respond to the infrastructure needs when there is budget constraints. And I think Lebanon does cater to this situation very well, and the infrastructure needs, as demonstrated this morning, are clearly made, and the link to that, or with that to the fiscal constraints, is very obvious. So what can be done to actually cover this gap through these type of projects? Of course, with the private sector being involved, there's faster procurement measures, and there's also other types of benefits that the private sector can offer. But the ultimate value is the better value for money through these type of projects. And hereby, we wanted to show you a little bit more on how this is a win-win situation for both key stakeholders, in this case the public and the private. So from the government side, you allow the government to focus more on the administrative aspect of these projects. The injection of new capital into the market is also beneficial. The other type of benefits that relate to the type of oversight and monitoring and regulatory framework that the government needs. But from the private sector, it's opportunities that allows for attractive type of projects, but then also it provides the private sector to work on more of an attractive, reform-oriented environment, and then operating under a more specific and clear regulatory framework. Here, we wanted to also show you a little bit about the type of misunderstandings about PPPs and how the mitigating facts on that are being interpreted. So when the concerns that the PPPs usually involve projects projects where tariffs will be raised. This is not the case because PPPs, in the way we structure them in the IFC, will involve a tariff setting clearly made by the government throughout the duration of the project. As far as services quality being, ended up being less than before, this is also not the case. With proper structuring of PPPs, you can mitigate all these type of risks, including government withdrawing responsibilities where that risk is mitigated through the type of guarantees that are offered. And then other types of risks that are usually alleged to be the case. We are happy to offer you more details about how this is not the case if PPPs are structured appropriately. And this is a quick demonstration of how we approach PPPs in the IFC. And again, it's nothing very different to how other DFIs do it, but in general, the way it has evolved in the IFC, becoming a lead advisor or agreeing with the counterpart government agency, whether it's a coordinating high-level agency like the HCP in the case of Lebanon, or the line ministry in some cases. We provide a set of technical assistance and advisory services that provides the assessment for the project on the legal, technical, and financial front. But then an IFC provides or presents a fully integrated team to work on throughout the project in a way that I guess was demonstrated a bit earlier. But the phasing approach also was demonstrated by His Excellency the Minister of Energy. This is the type of phasing that we take and the methodology that we undertake at the IFC, which involves the project preparation phase and then a structuring and bidding phase. The first phase is really key, where the government agency or the coordinating agency is quite engaged in setting the stage for a project that is alleged to be feasible, where the IFC then assesses the viability and bankability of this project, both legally and technically, but then also on the financial front. We then present the project to the government agency, who then agrees on we refer to it as a transaction structure report. If it looks feasible and it looks ready for implementation, we then go to the second phase, which is the marketing to pre-qualified private sector bidders, where the IFC manages the entire process in the most transparent fashion, and then we reach an end closing where we present the government with a list of proposed winning bidders to actually take the project and run with it. But ultimately, the key message I want to deliver today is, how do we go about attracting in the private sector investment into Lebanon, and where do we start? I think we should all agree on, and I think this is the type of message that we have had confirmed with the government of Lebanon, that the best way to start this is to make sure that there's a strategic planning for the CIP. And when we say strategic planning here, we're looking at commitments from both sides, private sector and the public sector. And to start successfully, we believe that there's got to be a few projects that can be implemented and set as success stories that can be built on. With this, again, the word strategic planning here adheres to proper leadership from the government and proper commitment to actually set the public sector plan for implementing the type of reforms that are needed on the fiscal and the macroeconomic policy to allow the private sector to agree to begin to be engaged in these complex projects. These projects are not easy to deliver. So really, the three aspects is to kickstart successfully through a number of good projects, to maximize the chances of successful entry to the private sector, and to begin developing these projects in a high focused and impactful space. In Lebanon, we believe that there are projects that are attracted and bankable and viable for these type of investments and I namely say in the power sector, as demonstrated earlier, but also a few in the transport sector, and then hopefully logistics. With that, the key success factors for bringing fresh money into the country and attracting private sector, we believe, are demonstrated in this slide. And as far as the commitment from the international community is concerned, I am here to confirm that there is commitment, there is availability of finance. I think it's also been mentioned a few times, but the idea is to allow the enabling environment in Lebanon to bring such finance into the country. In this case, any project must become bankable, and with that ensuring the government commitment is important. A legal regulatory framework is also very important. An appropriate risk allocation and the measurement of the risk is also quite important for that to happen. And then ultimately, sponsorship quality. The implementation and the durability and sustainability of projects must adhere to the right selection of sponsors. I'll stop right here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saad. And again, I think we'll debate a bit later, but let's just keep going with the presentations from the panelists. Layal, if you want to go next, or you prefer to go last. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I see some sleepy and tired faces. I promise that I will be short. My name is Layal Abdeen, and I am a senior underwriter at MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. And I also overlook the business development in the MENA region. So this is the same slide that Saad actually has presented in regards to what is the World Bank Group. As you can see, we are the MIGA. We are the youngest institution. We have been established since 1988. And our mission is really to promote cross-border investments into emerging economies. And we do that by offering political risk insurance and credit enhancement products to investors. What do we mean by political risk insurance? And what do we mean by risk mitigation tools in general? And is political risk insurance the only risk mitigation tools? I would say no. I mean, many investors have invested in emerging economies and in conflict-affected economies, and they have used various tools to manage risks, whether by protecting themselves through the contractual obligations when they enter into commercial agreements with the government. Some investors choose to partner with local investors to navigate the bureaucracy in the local content. While some investors actually eye whether there is a bilateral investment treaty that has been signed with that particular host government. And this is important because bilateral investment treaties actually do have articles and do have terms that cover and protect investors and offer for arbitration mechanisms. And some investors do diversification. And I agree, these all are important for investors investing maybe in the manufacturing, in the agribusiness, you know, in the services sector. But when it comes to the infrastructure sector, it's quite more complex, and investors, whether we are talking about commercial banks or whether we are talking about equity investors, would demand more sophisticated risk mitigation tools. And such sophisticated risk mitigation tools may include political risk insurance. MIGA for Lebanon offers 4 kinds of products under the political risk insurance. The first one pertains to protecting the investors against transfer restriction, currency transfer restriction, and inconvertibility. What does that mean? It means the inability of the investor to convert the local currency into foreign currency and transfer this currency outside the country. Mind you that we do not cover against currency exchange rates, like if there was a depreciation in the currency, we do not cover that. What we cover is the government action that would actually restrict investors from converting the currency and transferring outside the country. Case in point, what happened in Egypt, for example, for a number of years. The second risk that we offer is expropriation. Expropriation can mean expropriation, confiscation, nationalization of assets or funds of the project enterprise. But not only that, it can actually mean passing discriminatory laws and regulations against the investor that would affect the financial viability of the project. It could mean revoking a license. The government might change, you know, in 5 or 6 years, and it might revoke the license of that investor. So we do protect against such risks. The third risk that we cover is the one that you probably all know, which is the political violence, or what we call the war and civil disturbance events. So in case there is a war, a civil disturbance event, a coup d'etat, anything that pursue a political ideology that would ultimately affect the assets of the project enterprise and would destroy the project enterprise, we would compensate the investor. Under the war and civil disturbance, we have a subcategory that is called as temporary business interruption, whereby if you have a political situation in the country. And because of that political situation, the project enterprise was unable to operate for 30 continuous days. We would compensate the investors for their operational expenses that they have incurred during that cessation period. And in some cases, we actually compensate investors for the lost profits that they would have incurred during that cessation period. And the last but not least, in terms of the products that we offer in Lebanon, is what is known as breach of contract. And this is quite very important cover, especially for investors entering into the infrastructure projects. And what do we mean by breach of contract? So if you have a case where there is an investor entering into a commercial agreement with the government, and the government, for some reason or another, breached that contract or breached the obligations under that contract, then we would ask both parties to go to arbitration. And if there is an arbitral award in favor of the investor, which would usually be the termination payment, we would compensate the investors. I would like to pause a little bit on the breach of contract and just go into the details and drill into the details of the eligibility of the breach of contract, because it's quite important. For us, when we are offering a breach of contract, it has to be a contract between the investor and the sovereign government. And by sovereign government, we mean line ministries. Now, and I know in many cases, and the case also will be in Lebanon, for like if we take the IPP's project, you would have actually the off-taker or the PPA signed not with a line ministry. Probably it would be signed with ADAL, which is a state-owned enterprise. So if such contracts happen, so if there is a commercial agreement with state-owned enterprise, we require actually 3 conditions to be met for the state-owned enterprise to be able to offer our breach of contract. The first condition, that it has to be majority owned by the government. The second condition is that it has to perform a government function. And the third condition, which is usually not met in most of the emerging economies, including Lebanon, is that this state-owned enterprise has to be credit-worthy. This is the problem, indeed. So what we usually actually, and this is, so what we usually require is that if investors are entering into a commercial agreement with state-owned enterprises that are not credit-worthy, then we would require the Ministry of Finance explicit guarantee to backstop the obligation of that state-owned enterprise. And what we would be offering actually is the breach of contract, and the contract would be actually the Ministry of Finance government guarantee. So this is, I just wanted to pause a little bit just to give you a flavor of how our breach of contract usually work. What we can cover, the most important eligibility criteria for us is that investors has to be cross-border investors. So we can cover international investors coming and investing in Lebanon, international commercial banks or regional commercial banks coming and investing in Lebanon. We can cover equity, shareholder loans, non-shareholder loans, and guarantees. We can also cover contracts, franchises, management contracts, leases, etc. Another thing is that we can cover up to 90% of the equity investment, and we can cover up to 95% of the loan. And by the loan, I mean both principal and interest. And one of our value added is actually that we can go up to long tenors. So usually we can offer our contract of guarantee up to 15 years, and in some cases up to 20 years. And this is quite also a very important feature, okay, for the infrastructure investors, because if you are trying to attract international commercial banks to come and invest in infrastructure projects that would have an obligations, or that have a tenor of 25, let's say, years, banks will not be able to come and offer you loans for 15 years or 20 years without a MEGA coverage. So this is quite important if you are trying to attract commercial banks. Another feature for us is that we cannot terminate the contract. So if things go south, we don't renegotiate the contract, we do not renegotiate our premiums. However, if the investor feels that he's comfortable with the risks in the country after investing a few years, they can cancel actually the contract after the 3rd year without any penalty. So what is our value added? We talked about the long tenors, but also one of our value added is our strong pre-claim management. So we were established in 1988. We covered probably more than 1,000 plus projects across the globe. And we have only paid 9 claims. And this is not because we are stingy. This is not because we don't like to pay claims. It's simply the fact that we are able to act as an honest broker between the government and between the investor when things go wrong, and actually find an amicable solution between the two sides. The 9 claims that we have paid, 7 of them were war and civil disturbance, things we cannot interfere, things we cannot stop, and 2 of them were expropriation events. One was in Argentina and one was in Indonesia. Just to give you a flavor about our strong pre-claim management. I think that's it in a nutshell. I don't know if I have more time. Do I have more time?
Yes, a little bit, because we need to leave some room for...
I just actually want to show them an example of a project that we covered in Jordan. So this is a power project that we covered in Jordan, and we covered the Chinese lenders in that project. It's Al-Zarqa thermal power project. Aqua of Saudi Arabia was actually the sponsor of that project. IFC was a lender into that project. EBRD also was a lender into that project. And they had the commercial tranche coming from 2 Chinese banks. And our coverage was quite important. So we offered the Chinese banks our full risk coverage. And because we were able to offer them a 20 years guarantees, they were able to extend their loans to 19 years, which was quite important for the bankability of the project. So I just wanted to show you this example, and I will take any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Layali. Francesco, last but not least, from the EIB.
Somebody from the region said once that the last will be the first. If you read the fine print, this is not applicable for food court and conferences. So I'll try nonetheless to pass a very short message, and I promise I won't have a PowerPoint for you. So just to the point. So, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank the authorities of Lebanon and the Secretary General of the High Council for Privatization and PPP for inviting European Investment Bank, the Bank of the European Union, to this conference. This conference shows how forward Lebanon has moved in the process of delivering a credible and solid PPP pipeline, at least in the primary sectors. For those who don't know the EIB, we are the largest multilateral lenders and borrower in the world. Last year we lent 78 billion euro, supporting investment of about 250 billion euro, and 10% of our lending goes outside the EU. The southern neighborhood, particularly strong for PPP lending, where we lent above 2.7 billion euro in PPP. In Lebanon, we've been a strong presence since several decades, and we have signed loans for about 2 billion euro, and financed in the past key infrastructure, such as the Beirut International Airport, the port of Tripoli, the highways, as well as projects in the water and wastewater sectors, as well as in energy, like the Jet and Zouk thermal power plant. Some of these projects are expected to be expanded, and the pipeline presented this morning particularly show that via PPP schemes, and we are very much interested in potentially contributing to their financing. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, Lebanon is also one of the main targets of the Economic Resilience Initiative, which was launched last year by the EIB. This initiative aims at rapidly mobilizing financial resources to support investment in infrastructure, developing the private sector, and stimulating growth and job creation, also as a response to the refugee crisis from neighboring countries. So we want to be the one of the main supporters with our partners of the capital investment plan of the government of Lebanon, partnership with the European Commission and particularly the EU delegation here in Beirut. So we are open to finance investments in a wide range of sectors through public as well as private sector lending. And we do that through direct lending as well as through bank intermediating loans. So we are already one of the main IFIs in the country and have good relationship with most of the banks that are sponsoring this event. So we have experience and we really want to continue financing good projects in Lebanon. So for what regard the PPP project, we believe there is a good momentum now. And we've been talking about this for quite a long time, including with Ziad Hai here several years ago. Now there's a PPP law. There are good projects. There's studies and feasibility studies that are advancing, and there are clear timeline for their procurement. So we want to keep the momentum. We want to contribute, particularly focused initially on several projects. Particularly, we are looking closely at the wind projects, round 1 and round 2, as well as the transport project, and we are looking forward to see the feasibility studies when they are completed. So finally, just to reach the conclusion, let me stress once more that we are keen to work with Lebanese authorities, with partners IFIs here on this panel, bilaterals, particularly European bilaterals, where we have very strong contacts, the EU, and other potential donors, particularly looking at the coming conference in Paris and in Brussels. We want to work with you and with them particularly, and mobilizing and helping to mobilizing grants to strengthen the soundness of the projects that are proposed, to ensure that they meet the required procurement standards as well as soundness and bankability, and also environmental and social standards so that IFI can convene and support them. So with your support, in partnership with all of you, we can and must do more to bring to the Lebanese people, as well as to refugees population currently in this country, sustainable infrastructure that will foster stability and prosperity for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesco. And that's actually a very good transition to my next question to the panelists, because you actually went into specifically talking about the CIP and your appetite to support some of the projects. And I think at the end of the day, as we all know, we have the SAD conference in 1 month in Paris, and what the Lebanese authorities and the Lebanese people are actually looking for is to kind of identify the amount of support available, first from the multinationals, and then obviously from the broader investor base. So I just have a quick question for every one of the panelists. Thank you very much for presenting your capabilities. But what is your feedback, if any, at this stage on the CIP? Do you have appetite for Lebanon? And effectively, have you identified some projects that you're interested in? And what kind of risk return you're pursuing? I know there's too many questions, so feel free to answer what you want.
Thank you. I mean, as a DFI, we have been sort of eyeing the situation in Lebanon very closely over the years. As IFC, for instance, we are already invested in the Lebanon economy for directly from our own balance sheet at an amount that exceeds $500 million. And unfortunately, it has not been in the infrastructure sector for all obvious reasons. So risk measures are quite have been really the issue with regards to sort of unlocking the potential on the infrastructure side. But really, direct financing in terms of the type of products that can be offered from DFIs, whether it's debt, equity, quasi-equity, mezzanine, all types of direct financing products are quite available, and it's really catering. I think it's more of a policy enabling environment issue that needs to be looked at. So right now, building on this momentum that the government of Lebanon is taking, I think we're a frontier DFI that has been looking at these type of opportunities. And in Kirki's that not only the conventional type of financial markets financing can play a role. We think capital markets can also come in. Bonds are being looked at by several of the key tier 1 banks in the country. And I think we're not at the stage of actually defining the type of returns from these projects, if you ask, but the IPPs are quite advanced in terms of the type of understanding that we have with the government. And anyone has yet reached the point of actually analyzing the financial type of structure that will be put for these projects. I think what's more important right now and what's been taking a lot of back and forth is setting up the legal framework for these projects. In the case of the IPPs, for instance, and in the case of the wind projects, as mentioned by the colleague, we're still dwelling around several key provisional facts in the legal front that need to be clarified. And this is what I think has been taking a lot of the time. One of which is as simple as mentioned by my colleague Layali, is what we do with the sovereign guarantee front. In Lebanon, for instance, that's the key issue right now. We understand that there is no legislation that recognizes what the sovereign guarantee is in Lebanon. That's one. The second thing is the typical provisional aspect in any PPP legal agreement that mandates that the waiver of sovereign immunity must be taken into account. That's also another challenge that's being looked at right now. I think once Lebanon as a government understand that these are precedent to any PPP project, it can snowball. And as far as the financial structuring of these projects, I don't think it will be a challenge once the legal regulatory framework is well framed, I would say.
Thank you, sir.
Very good. Well, I mean, I think perhaps just a bit of context to give you a flavor of our appetite for this region. In 2012, EBRD had not yet established any kind of lending presence in anywhere in the Middle East or North Africa, which we call SEMED, Southern and Eastern Mediterranean. Today, that region, those 5 countries, now approximate 50% of all of our lending per year. So it's almost 5 billion euros in lending out of 10 that we did in 2017. So that shows you how we are fully engaged. This is the growth area for us. Lebanon, as I said, is a new country, but I fully expect it to be just like Egypt has been, just like Jordan and others. So real appetite, and the results are there. I would say a comment. The PPP law is new, as was discussed this morning. We're reviewing it. We'd be happy to do a quite more extensive review legally of what's there and what might be missing. Happy to help provide further support in that area. But anything that's new needs to be tested, and so we'll go through that process, and that's part of the reason why we've created this facility. We have legal firms who are highly experienced in PPP transactions, and if it's not 100% in a law, you can cover some of those gaps within the concession contracts and the PPP contracts. So the last comment I would make is that in general, and I have to say part of the reason that I'm here is to become more familiar with the projects on the CIP. But typically, airports, ports, toll roads, the IPPs, all of them have one thing in common, which is real revenues, and they can be very commercially structured. When you have revenues paid by users, this provides even more sort of underpinning and not justification, but underpinning of the solidity of those revenues for the private sector. So that helps a lot. So I would, if I had to sort of take a guess, probably I would say the airport seems to be the one that
So you prefer revenue by users than revenue by government?
Well, it helps. It helps. It's not that we're adverse. As I said, in Egypt, that example, we've closed 10 hospital PPPs. These are entirely funded by the public sector, the Ministry of Health of Turkey. There are no revenues from users. It's a public health system, and we're fully willing to go in with almost €1 billion in investment there. So we can do both, but I would just say, if you're going to start somewhere, perhaps the ones with the revenue have a bit more support behind them.
Thank you, Matthew. Layali, have you done political insurance in Lebanon so far? Do you have appetite? And how much does it cost?
So we are open in Lebanon. We don't have restrictions is a bankable project that has been structured, and investors would demand a political risk insurance, then we are happy to consider that project and provide our coverage. We did cover a project in Lebanon. We covered one of the DSP providers, actually, Data Utility Services. We covered them, and we covered their Egyptian partner. And we covered them against both civil disturbance, expropriation, and breach of contracts. On pricing, our pricing is market-based, so it really would depend on the project, on its size, on its location. So there are many variables that would come into our pricing model to provide the pricing. So for any investors who are interested, they can just email me or pick up the phone, provide me with a rough parameters of the project, and I can provide the non-binding indicators on the range of the pricing.
Thank you. I want to move to a theme that we addressed earlier, and I think Jean also touched on that, which, again, I think we have here on the panel capital providers which are indispensable to jumpstart this program, but not enough because there is still a funding gap that needs to be covered by investors, private investors, and institutional investors. And I think I can speak for many of the private investors who are sitting here. If we like one of those projects and we want to invest in them, it's very difficult to know how to do that. Because as Jean mentioned, historically, the capitalism in Lebanon is, I would say, a bit clubby. So you have few large investors who go into a project because they know each other and they know the project well enough. There's no institutional base that can come and provide capital in a pure financial way. Even though we have a large pool of capital, which is the diaspora first and foremost that keeps sending money to Lebanon, and also, as you mentioned earlier, a very large number of infrastructure funds that could be interested and captive for this type of plan. So I think it's very important to address that gap and to create the risk transfer mechanism that can allow for such a flow or such an FDI to operate. So my question to Jean, I know this is a topic that's very important for you as well, as a local institution, do we have the platforms that can allow FDIs to come in a purely financial way and in a more public way? Or are the local institutions or the government working on setting the stage?
I think you said it all. Firstly, we have to move away from the clubby investment that you have seen in the past. So as I said in the presentation, structuring corporate governance is going to be very important. And the insistence I had, which is not the majority of the cases in the world where we segregate operation from the assets ownership, is because you, as a private investor, maybe don't want to be involved with a sponsor who is going to screw up because he has other activities and will channel the money to something else. So this is what we were talking about, but there are many other solutions. So structuring properly, making sure that we are covered by law in terms of governance and reporting is very important, and the law, they do exist in Lebanon. Second, I believe as any investor, you would be looking at the risk-weighted return and would like to choose the level of risk and the level of return you want. If Matthew can give us some 8-notch credit enhancement, it would help so we can be investment grade. But I think it's going to be complicated. But I believe, and you know better than me, that there are infrastructure funds who invest in emerging markets and even in frontier markets. So I think we can do it if we have the proper risk mitigation, including the insurance that Layal is going to provide the projects. We have the proper governance, we have the proper structuring. We can attract money from the pool of capital, from the diaspora, from the Lebanese, the residents. They have also money abroad. Today, you still have people putting money in the Lebanese banks because they're getting 5% interest on the USD. If you can offer bonds, for example, even long-term bonds, but that are tradable with high yields and with the proper risk mitigation, I think we are able to attract money from funds, from private investors, from the diaspora. I'm quite confident. Money wants return and wants to look at risks.
But how do we start, like who's supposed to start this process in terms of offering the product? Do we have now institutions who are starting funds? I mean, we have a program. Do we have funds that are being set up by the local institutions, or maybe the government should see it, or the local pension funds? I don't know, maybe Matthew or Saad, you can opine on other experience in other countries. How do we initiate an institutional investor base, and who starts usually?
Well, let me just tell you how things have gone in Turkey, which is our most extensive experience. Essentially there is, in some ways it's similar to Lebanon in terms of this very strong local investor base, very strong local construction companies, but the magnitude of what they're trying to do is beyond the means even of a large economy like Turkey. So, the hospital program alone is $30 billion of investment. So it's very, very large. Essentially, what's needed, I think, and what they've been able to do is not only do they structure the projects in a very bankable, acceptable way in terms of the risk allocation, but they also provided things that go beyond the product that I talked about. Forex risk. Okay, forex risk is essentially taken at a certain level by the government by providing a mechanism beyond indexing to inflation. If the Turkish lira devaluates more than a certain percentage within any given rolling 6-month period, the downside risk is capped by the Turkish treasury. Initially in the transport project was around only a 5% devaluation in those terms. Today it's around 20%. So the investor has to take a 20% kind of devaluation risk, but below that the Turkish treasury steps in. And they did this because it was essential. Even though it's a huge, big, robust economy, investors needed that kind of support. So that's, that provides for...
That was the government or the central bank?
That was the Turkish treasury, yeah. But another aspect, which is actually just last week, was being discussed in earnest at the G20 Infrastructure Working Group, which I'm a part of for EBRD. It was the need for what institutional investors need to create this asset class idea. They need better data. They need better data on emerging market infrastructure. Right now, not only is financial performance data of historic projects that the IFIs have financed over the last 30 years is somewhat spotty, but also anything to do with sort of environmental, social, and governance type, ESG type data, economic data, economic returns, etc. This database is very spotty. We need to do more, and I think what we committed to as an IFI group is providing our information to essentially a new platform for data on infrastructure. And this initiative actually is sort of being spearheaded by EID, our colleague to the right, and the Global Infrastructure Hub, the G20. I think that'll help a lot. That's really to move the needle. They need better data to feel more comfortable with this asset class as it's emerging.
From a different angle, I guess it's. So I think project finance is a specialty that one can argue that only a few institutions are aware of. And I think in the context of Lebanon, while I believe that capital markets can play a very important role going forward, and it's building in the context of the advanced level that the banks in Lebanon have, but I think if we take, and I want to repeat my points, if we take projects on a one case-by-case basis in Lebanon to whereby the applicability of project finance, and hereby building on this momentum for the conference coming up in Paris, we as the World Bank Group have been asked to sort of assess these projects and see possible financing tools and means. And here, ideas are floating around whether a viability gap facility can be established, or a guarantee fund, or a blended finance facility, or a capital markets facility. In any case, I think as we move forward, it's a process, and key projects will be identified. And I think from our perspective as IFC, project finance will be the solution for each project, and it's building on the experiences that have been done elsewhere, and in the context of possibly the most feasible project in Lebanon, the airport. The very neighboring to Lebanon, the Queen Alia Airport, is a project that was done as successfully as you can imagine, where the government of Jordan is now an existing partner in the project at 54% stake at carried interest. They did not pay a penny, and over the past 10 years, they've managed to realize a return of over $1 billion. A project that is efficient, a project that was done successfully. How can this be replicated in Lebanon? And then as we move forward, the process begins. It's a reform area that will, not only the public sector will have to adhere to some reform agenda, the private sector will also advance to mobilizing the type of facilities that can be used for these projects. But I think in the short to medium run, the spectrum will involve project finance with risk mitigation measures to cover the gaps on the political risk, the country risk on Lebanon, and the type of measures that can be applied by agencies like MIGA, etc.
Thank you. Francesco, do you have anything to add on how to institutionalize the investor base, or how the EIB has been involved in such a process in other countries?
Differently from IFC, we don't have a mandate to create the capital market, so I would refer to our colleague from IFC on that. We normally would look at the project on a case-by-case basis, and then see the structure, how it's been made, understand that the running case will be structured by IFC. So we're looking forward to see the project information memorandum when it will be ready, and then we will do our assessment to see bankability. On the renewable project, all the IFI are working together to ensure the bankability of the PPA. So there is some coordinated effort to work toward the bankability of those. Again, we will look on a case-by-case basis, and at the moment we're not let's say betting on a capital market solution in the very short term, at least.
I think with that, I mean, we don't have enough time, but I'd like to take some questions from the audience as well. Yes. Who would like to answer that? John?
It's a very good idea, actually, but I wouldn't say crowdfunding, but let's say a fund that would be like one fund with discretionary powers to invest in the different PPP projects. It's not easy to implement. It would need the support of the gentleman, and I don't know if this works somewhere else, but why not? This would be a way to channel, for example, private diaspora money.
I think I can just comment quickly. The issue we face is obviously those projects initially are technical and high risk, so you can't easily get the retail investor on a crowdfunding platform to get in. Jean's idea of having funds which are specialized and diversified and know what they're doing is what we see in other emerging markets. Usually those funds are sometimes even seeded by government agencies or government entities, like a pension fund or local institutions. So again, they provide comfort for the retail investor that this is managed in a professional way. I think clearly that should be the next step for investors in order to attract, and I think Jean mentioned earlier, you attract much more interest from the public, and then the public becomes an owner in the project, which creates also a wealth distribution mechanism. Yes, please.
not only the quick return on the investment, but the long-term return on the bioeconomy, on the environment, on the water, on the tourism that drove a lot of the infrastructure reforms that might be needed. Is my question clear?
Great. I think I heard it. I captured it. Yeah, I mean, these projects such as wastewater treatment plants, for example, you mentioned water. Of course, they can be done as PPPs, and they can be done successfully. You know, there's a very successful PPP in Jordan, a wastewater treatment plant that's ongoing, 10-year track record. It's working well. But it has to be structured in a way that you build up the case for tariffs which cover as much of the total capex and operational cost as possible. This kind of commercialized environment needs to be there, starting from a heavily subsidized environment where the society's attitude towards that resource, towards water, is essentially it's kind of a public good that should be as cheap as possible or free. I'm exaggerating, but there are countries around the world where that's kind of the mentality. It's very, very difficult to then do a PPP structure on top of that. So I think we have to kind of build up, if you remember the pyramid that I put up there, you have to sort of build into a more commercialized environment, still with the public sector, and then get to a point where you're ready and the society and the users are willing to pay more for a higher quality service, which is reliable 100%, 24 hours a day, et cetera, et cetera. Until that, so you have to build up over time. I'm cautious about jumping too quickly, too soon into those kinds of projects unless the user base, the citizens are really ready for it. But having said that, the private sector can do a lot to improve efficiencies. A lot of our water systems that we work with, when we start, there's 60% water losses, 65% water losses. So the utility company is pumping water and losing 2/3 of it through the pipes. Doesn't even reach the users. So that's completely wasteful. So getting that right, getting that down to sort of under 50%, down to 40, down to 30, then you can start to have huge improvements on cost to begin with. So that helps. But that's what I would say. So it's, you got to go step by step. That's, I guess, my message.
Do I have time for another question?
Looking at the CIP and the discussion that's going on today, we talked a lot about regulatory framework, legal framework, financing, and obviously PPP is a great tool, to build this financing of heavy infrastructure. But there seems to be one missing element, which is privatization. Okay, pure privatization of some of the institutions, which could have two things: like first, bring money, so alleviate the financing needs. And second, complement the financing that is required, for maybe other infrastructure projects which really needs PPP and other financing tools. So it's very surprising to me that all these parties who are on the table, who I'm sure can very well advise the government on how to proceed and complement the privatization. This is totally absent from the CIP and from the discussion.
I think, Jean, do you want to answer that? I mean, it's a fair point. I think we all agree that privatization is key.
I agree 100% with you, and I can't understand why we're not, for example, privatizing the Middle East airlines. An airline company shouldn't be on the balance sheet of the central bank, and it's easy, it's private, it's working, it's making money. Same thing for the telecom operators. Makes no sense, they were private. It was a BOT basis, but still, I mean, you could privatize them. And it's not even for the money, it's for the efficiency. I don't have the answer.
Yeah, do you want to comment?
Look, all I can say is that you need political consensus to do privatization, which is a step beyond PPP, so it's a bit more difficult. But I agree that our telecom sector should be privatized. It is the one sector that requires real privatization way beyond PPP. So hopefully one day we'll get there. The first step, whether it is telecom or civil aviation, etc., is to form these regulatory authorities that Ambassador Duquesne mentioned this morning. We desperately need regulatory authorities in order to be able to provide for continuity of policies and not change strategy every time the 1 year and a half government changes.
I think, I mean, that's obviously the elephant in the room, but I would comment that, you know, most of the CIP, if not everything, I think is greenfield, which obviously needs first funding through this kind of institutions before it gets to a privatization stage, because if we're doing a power plant or if it's all greenfield, so there is a PPP angle, but it's difficult to privatize it on day one. Will be hopefully maybe, it should maybe be privatized in 3 or 4 or 5 years once it's mature. The comment you make about privatization of existing profitable and viable businesses, obviously it's more of a funding question for the government. But I think because the scope is CIP, we didn't talk about the privatization for those projects under the CIP, just like as an aside. I think we're done. Okay, well, just one quick last question because you've been raising your hand.
My name is May Sayed. I would like to ask your distinguished guest that all of you are eager to invest on expansion of airports and those that bring you more revenues, but aren't you eager to invest more in the remote areas, especially where there's no infrastructure? Because, you know, in these remote areas, we suffer from, we have poor infrastructure, and the majority of refugees are settling there. So the bulk of the investments I see are focused more on urban areas. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I think while we, as DFIs, try to always strike a balance between impact and additionality and then profitability. Yeah, so I mean, as far as IFC is concerned, we don't, you know, engage in projects that will distort the market or actually crowd the market. If there's others who can make money out of a project, then we don't engage. So really, impact and added value is a key important focus point for us. As far as working on less deserved or less privileged locations in the country, you're absolutely right. I mean, part of the CIP is looking at you know, the development of special economic zones in the north and in Tripoli. And we believe that for that project to be successful, as a PPP, it must include a broader northern corridor development, a national development program for the north of Lebanon to become more of a logistical hub, to help to create jobs in Lebanon, but then also to play a very important role in the reconstruction and recovery of Syria. So we are working towards these type of projects. We're pushing the agenda to work to actually establish PPPs in that front. On the other hand, PPPs in the social sector, health, education, we're trying to push the agenda where actually the involvement of the public sector remains quite important. These are also key areas. We're looking at Tripoli, we're looking at Saida, we're looking at Sur, where it makes sense. And again, it's being able to strike that balance where you can actually make a project that will create impact, will create additionality, but also has to be profitable. And here's where it becomes challenging. The cost allocation, the pricing model of the project must make sense.
Thank you. Walid, last question.
Maybe just to take you toward a more technology-intensive area. One of the programs, which seems like a lower-hanging fruit because it's smaller in size, is about a national data center and associated maybe telecom infrastructure. Do you, any of the financial institutions that you represent, have you been involved in a similar project? And what would be your success factors, assessment around it, and how different will it be from a typical, more conventional infrastructure projects? Thank you.
Who wants to take that?
I'm not a specialist, but honestly, I don't understand what the state has to do with data centers. Should be totally private, I believe. But I might be wrong. Maybe I'm missing something.
Just to say, certainly EBRD does work in the ICT sector. These types of projects, are of interest interest to us. But I want to say, just to respond to your question, I do not specifically work in that type of project in ICT, but I have colleagues who do, and I'll put them in touch with you. I'd like them to look at it for as that preparation is going forward.
If I may, on ICT is, again, I'm not the specialist either, but in ICT, we've done a few projects which I've looked at in other countries where here the public contribution, particularly from the development of the infrastructure, becomes important. So for a project, the way we have done it is the focus of the private participation is mostly at the operational management front, whereas the government remains the custodian and holder of the infrastructure development. So this is where a viability gap finance can make sense, or concessional public finance can cover the development of the infrastructure, and then the private sector can come on the operational management front.
Okay, I think we need to stop because we've reached the end of the session. Obviously, the gentleman and the lady are available for more questions if you need to. I'd like to thank everyone here, the panelists, the organizers, and the audience for this session. I'd like to quickly conclude by kind of giving the message that, as we've seen, there is commitment for the CIP from major financial institutions and international institutions. There has been a lot of work put into this program. I think it can be transformational for our economy in terms of the macro picture and the growth and the business and job creation, but also in terms of the infrastructure that I think our country deserves. But clearly, the message from everybody here is we need to provide the full value chain in order to get this right. We have to get this right, but for that we need obviously to apply the laws, and we have some very good laws that need to be that are here that we can apply. We need to offer any capital provider with the transparency and the governance that they would expect, and the attractive risk return, because as a country we can benefit from a large pool of capital available, including our diaspora, but we're competing for capital with a lot of other emerging markets, and we need to be competitive in terms of risk, but in terms also of protection on the investors, and also, which we didn't touch on, in terms of exit, because investors who come in need to be able to exit at some stage. Only the multinationals stay for 15 years. So again, that's another theme, which is the capital markets that can be there available for privatization or for basically instruments to be listed. Thank you, everyone. And again, good luck for the SAD conference.
We have last two announcements. So we have the wrap-up remarks by Dr. Nadim Mullah and Mr. Ziad Hayek. And then we will have a short informative session organized by Fransa Bank with the participation of Mr. Adnan Kassar, the chairman, and the Chinese ambassador. They will present, how can banks serve international companies in Lebanon. سنبدأ الجلسة الختامية. أرجو من المشاركين الكرام أخذ أماكنهم. سنبدأ الجلسة الختامية. الرجاء من المشاركين الكرام أخذ أماكنهم. سنبدأ الجلسة الختامية. الرجاء من المشاركين الكرام أخذ أماكنهم. الرجاء من المشاركين أخذ أماكنهم. سنبدأ الجلسة الختامية. Please take your seats. We will start the wrap-up session. تفضل دكتور نديم.
نحن فيصل نفتح اي سؤال، ما هيك؟ تفضل هيك، يعني ما بدهم يسمعوا، يمكن في اسئله اكثر من باي مجال اذا في شيء اي تساؤل باي تفصيل بنحاول زياد وانا نجاوب عليه، إذا ما من خلال البرزنتيشنز ما تجاوب عليها. تفضل.
بس إذا فيك توضح لنا شوي شو المهلة الزمنية للبدء بهالمشاريع، يعني اليوم بعد المؤتمر اللي حيصير بنيسان في عدة انتخابات وحكومة جديدة، شو المهل الزمنية اللي انتم عم بتشوفوها لتبلشوا بالمشاريع وليبلشوا يعطوا مفعول على الاقتصاد اللبناني؟
فينا نعذبكم بس سكروا الباب بليز لأنه جاي عشا شوي إذا بتريدوا. حدا يسكر الباب. شكرا. عم بفترض على في سؤالين، يعني أو السؤال شقين. الشق الأول يلي بيتعلق بالكابيتال انفستمنت بروجرام كله، وفي الشق اللي بيتعلق بالبي بي بي. المهل الزمنية أكيد أسرع حسب نوع الفندنج. يعني خليني أقول لك اليوم هالبرنامج هو رح يعرض على مجلس الوزراء وأخذ الموافقة من مجلس الوزراء خلال هذا الشهر. فمتوقع أنه الحصول على موافقة مجلس الوزراء على المشاريع ورسالة إلى المجلس النيابي. ولكن رسالة إلى المجلس النيابي هون سؤال كثير كبير، إذا رح يوافق البرلمان عليها قبل الانتخابات ولا بعد. يعني هذا سؤال كثير كبير. عم بفترض وزياد ممكن يصلحني انه الاشياء اللي بتتعلق بالبي بي بي ممكن من امبارح اذا في مشروع او حدا مهتم بمشروع يفتح حوار حوله من اليوم مع الهاي كونسل فور برايفتيزيشن لدسكشن وسو اون سو فورث. هلا كل مشروع عنده لي تايم مختلف، يعني في مشاريع بدها يعني مثلا سمعنا من الاي اف سي انه الليد تايم about 18 months plus for power sector يعني فيها. So هيدي بتعتمد على الفينيشينج اوف ذا ستاديز اند سو اون بحب ضيف يعني لبنان اليوم على مفترق طريق. في قانون جديد طلع عمره أشهر ما عمره سنوات. الدولة يبدو في قرار بالتوجه إلى مشاريع الشراكة. في مشاريع انعرضت ويمكن رح يطلع مشاريع إضافية خلال السنوات القادمة. أنا برأيي إن احنا رح نتعلم كثير من أول تجربة، ويعني الهاي كونسل فور برايفتيزيشن مع الوزارات المعنية من خلال أول بروجكت رح تتعلم كثير ونمشي لقدام. أنا برأيي نطلع على نص المثلين اليوم، ونص المثلين كثير واعد إنه أخذنا قرار وقرار كثير مهم بإشراك القطاع الخاص بالاستثمار بالبنى التحتية، وهذه خطوة كثير كثير مهمة لقدام. لا تفضل.
نحن يعني في جو المؤتمر كيف نهندس الشراكة بين القطاع الخاص والقطاع العام. ونحن عايشين بأجواء مؤسساتنا، كيف هالمؤسسات بدنا نطور تفكيرها لحتى تخدم على الشراكة مع القطاع العام، تاخذ جميع القطاع العام. خلال المداولات بالمؤتمر في ملاحظتين لفتوا لي نظري يناقضوا تماما التوجه اللي نحن عايشين فيه. الملاحظة الأولى إنه القطاع المصرفي ما عنده هالإمكانيات الكبيرة للمشاركة. هي أول ملاحظة، أحد الزملاء قالها. وثاني ملاحظة إنه مش مستحب يكون هالمساهمة من الداخل، بل المستحب تكون من الخارج. فهالملاحظتين الحقيقة عملوا تناقض شوي بتفكيرنا وبالاتيتيود تبعنا وبالجو اللي نحن عايشين فيه، وأتمنى أن يكون في شيء من التوضيح حوله.
بفتكر أنت عم تلمع على النقطة اللي أثرتها معي صباحا. خليني أوضح هذه النقطة مشان ما يكون فيها التباس. أولا بالشق إنه شو إمكانيات القطاع المصرفي بلبنان على مواكبة خطة الحكومة بإشراك القطاع الخاص بالبنى التحتية. في شقين، في شق تقني، يعني لبنان ما عنده القطاع المصرفي بلبنان ما عنده تجربة، هذه تجربة جديدة له، وبالتالي رح يستعين بخبرات. أول ترانزاكشن رح تكون صعبة، ثاني ترانزاكشن أقل صعوبة، ثالث ترانزاكشن رح تكون سهلة. بالعكس هي مناسبة للقطاع المصرفي بلبنان إنه يدخل بعملية هندسات مالية جديدة يلي نحن ما متعودين عليها من خلال جون فنتشرز مع EBRD مع EIB مع IFC مع مؤسسات ثانية. بالعكس أنا بعتبر هذه فرصة ذهبية للقطاع المصرفي بلبنان ينتقل إلى مرحلة متقدمة. بالنسبة للشق الثاني والنقطة اللي أثرتها، أنا عم أقول إنه إذا عم تخير لبنان بين احتمالين، بين إنه يستعمل موارده الداخلية الموجودة بالقطاع المصرفي وموارده المالية ما البشرية، موارده المالية، هذا بتعمل مشكلة بمحل ثاني بميزان المدفوعات. وبالتالي النقطة الأساسية إنه هم لبنان ما بس يعمل بنى تحتية ويعمل معدلات نمو وبس، كمان عنده هدف ما يخلق مشكلة اقتصادية بمكان ثاني. لهالسبب نجاح الموداليتيز يلي بياخذوا بعين الاعتبار فريش ماني could be diaspora money من الابرواد او من خلال الموارد البشرية اللبنانية الموجودة بالخارج يلي في صناديق استثمار ممكن يدخلوا فيها. هذا الأمر وهذا التوجه أفضل للبنان من التوجه الثاني. هذا لا يلغي ولكن أفضل بكثير من التوجه الأول.
اسمح لي أزيد شيء إنه نحن ما لازم نحط يعني الشغله بوجه الثاني.
شو المشاريع أكثر المشاريع اللي جذبت القطاع الخاص ليفوت بالPPP وشو هي الشروط اللي عم تنطرح أو عم نحكي ب 18 مشروع بالكتيب اللي توزع، شو هي الشروط اللي طالبها أو عم يطرحها القطاع الخاص ليفوت؟
بدك تسأل القطاع الخاص القطاع الخاص عنده شروط معينة يعني حسب كل مشروع أكيد بده يخفف من الريسك، بده يتأكد إنه يكون في ربحية، بده يتأكد إنه رح يقدر هو يعني يكون عنده قدرة تنافسية، بس بالحقيقة يعني صعب واحد يدخل فيهم ويرد يحكي كل مشروع.
يعني واضح بالمرحلة الأولى بدنا نروح على المشاريع يلي الستراكشرينج تبعهم اسهل من غيرهم والريسك المنتس تبعهم اسهل من غيرهم بالتعاطي معهم. يعني مثلا مشروع مثل مشروع الكهرباء او باور جنريشن اسهل الستراكشرينج له من مشروع صرف صحي بمكان. سو البدايه ولهالسبب 18 مشروع اللي انطرحوا بالكتيب بيستندوا لهالمبدا. يعني لما تاخذ CIP 250 مشروع اي مشاريع على الاقل نحن باعتقادنا من التجربه يلي اسهل لطرحهم على القطاع الخاص نحطه. هلا كل عمليه مثل ما قال زياد القطاع هو الخاص يلي بده يحدد شهيته او الابيتايت تبعه بالريسك تيكينج وباي مجالات واذا هو مرتاح بالستراكشرينج تبعه. هيدي يعني خاضعه لحديث. تفضل
دكتور ملا. السؤال يعني مفرح السرعه اللي انتم عم تشتغلوا فيها والقانون مثل ما تفضلت عرض فتحي وانتم ماشيين، وهذا شيء نحن حابين نشوف تغيير الاستراتيجي CIP ابروتش. بس سمعناه اليوم اذا فهمته صح للمفوض الفرنسي انه تقريبا عنده بري كونديشنز انه معكم يا جماعه 4 أسابيع لتوصلوا على الريليز، الميزانيه مقرره، الهيئات النظاميه خاصه الطيران المدني والطاقه والاتصالات مفعله، والمرسوم التطبيقي او اليونت اوف PPP ابروفد. وهذا كله شيء بنحب انه يصير هالشيء، بس اذا ما صار شو الكونسيكونسز؟
اولا انا كلمه شروط او مشروطه ما بحبها، كلمه ما بحبها. انا بعتقد النقطه الاساسيه اللي منطلقين منها واللي انطلق منها الموفد الفرنسي وحتى دوله الرئيس بكلمته، ودوله الرئيس قال انتم يعني انا حابب حدا يقول لي انه بدك تعمل هيك ومجبور تعمل هيك والا ما نروح على بر الامان. فانا مثل ما قلت بدال عباره شروط او مشروطه بقول المجتمع الدولي عم يوجه رساله الى لبنان انه استقرار لبنان هو اهميه لنا، استقراره الامني الاجتماعي الاقتصادي، ولكن يا اللبنانيين بدكم تساعدوا حالكم قبل ما تطلبوا منا نساعد. كيف فيكم تساعدوا حالكم؟ هيدي بعض الامور المطروحه. اكيد التقبل عند المجتمع الدولي رح يكون اكثر لما بيشوفوا في جديه. انا واثق انه اليوم لليوم وحتى بهذا المؤتمر المجتمع الدولي بهذا الجو معتبر انه في خطوات عم تتخذ، في اراده سياسيه بالخط والمنحى يلي لازم تروح الامور عليها. في بعض الامور التفصيليه رح لك منها، في منها رح يقدر يخلص قبل مشروع له واقعه وله شروطه وله طريقة التفاوض حوله، وبالتالي ما فيك تعمم انه كل المشاريع الريسك تبعها نفسها وعملية تركيبة الديل او المشروع رح يكون مثله. ولكن انا بقول لك خليني اقول لك الشق اللي بيتعلق بلبنان عموما ما ليس لهذا المشروع، انه نحن للمشاريع يلي الدولة بدها تنفذهم اخذين قرار انه تقوم بشروط ميسرة، يعني فائدة بين 1 و 1.5 على 20 سنة وما فوق، مع فترة سماح بين 5 سنين ل 10 سنين. هيدي الشروط العامة اللي لبنان حطها لحتى يستقطب تمويل للمشاريع، وخصوصا المشاريع يلي القطاع الخاص منه مهتم فيها او بيعتبرها اكثر خطورة من ثاني. الشق يلي بيتعلق بدور الدولة بالقطاع بالشراكة ما بين القطاع العام والخاص، ايضا في طروحات انه في بعض المشاريع مطلوب من الدولة تدخل لتكون اكثر قدرة على الربحية وبالتالي على استقطاب رؤوس الاموال. هذا نقطة يعني الدولة اللبنانية حساسة فيها، يعني انا ما بدي اخذ من تسهيلات يلي موجودة لقطاع انا بدي نفسه وحطه للقطاع الخاص، فهون في حذر من قبل القطاع العام انه انتم روحوا جيبوا مصرياتكم بس ما تدقوا بالتسهيلات اللي عندي اياها، والا اكون انا ك يعني حصه القطاع العام بهذه المشاريع ومساهمتها اكثر بكثير من مساهمه القطاع الخاص. مايكروفون.
ميرسي كثير، ميرسي عم تنورونا كفايه. برجع بسمي اسمي أنطوان منسا، كمان مسؤول احترافي. معلش بس بحب اذكر مسيو زياد انه لنا سنتين نحن على الوقت الحاضر منا عم نركض ولا شمال ولا يمين، عم نقول نحن مستعدين كلنا سوا نجي اذا في صمام امان بلبنان نجي نستثمر بلبنان، بس بدنا سكيورتي لهالموضوع. طلعنا بمشروع وكتبناه بجرايد اللي صار موجود، وضلينا للريبورت مثل ما بيقولوا طالبين شيء اسمه انترناشونال تشامبر هاوس. كل واحد يجي من الخارج بده يستثمر يقرب على الهاوس هيدي، ونجرب نعمل مثل موفمنت بشان البي بي بيز هون ونعطيهم شويه سكيورتي، وتكون هيدي بالاتفاقيه مع الاسوسياسيون دي بانك، بيكون عندنا مظله مصرف لبنان، وحكيناها مره ومرتين وثلاثه، ولو عملناها من سنتين وثلاثه ما كنا هلا قاعدين ناطرين شمال ويمين فشبكه علينا الاثنين.
انا بس حابب خلي الميكروفون معك اذا بتريد، بس سؤال شو يعني قصدك بالسكيورتي؟ شو قصدك بمظله مصرف لبنان؟ يعني هيدي النقطتين بكبوا بس من العيار الثقيل، بس خلينا نفهم شو بتعني فيه.
اليوم نحن موجودين برا، عم يجي اكس واي ان زي،
نعم،
هيدا عم بحط $800,000، هيدا عم بحط $1 مليون، هيدا عم بحط $400,000 شمال ويمين، عم يعملوا باردون اسمعوا شوي، عم بيطبوا شنطات من الدنيا، هم بيضلوا ماشيين يعني عم بيخسرون وما في مين عم بيروح عن كونتاكت معهم، ما في ديليجيشنز عم بتروح عنده. هلا صحيح في عندنا مؤتمرات كبيره وواسعه، في عندنا LDE وفي عندنا اكسترا، بس للاسف بياخذوا قرارات واتخذت عده قرارات وانا كنت فيهم، يعني حطوني فيهم بالقرارات هيدي كهلفه، وللاسف ثاني يوم فينيش كل واحد يروح على بيته ما في ميل. وبتامل انه اليوم كمان ما نكون ما يكون في نوقف ما يكون في ميل الدنيا. وهيدا عم بحكي لكم بوينت دو في براتيك وعايشينه يوميا. اليوم بنعطي ثقه، هلا بدك تحكي لي بالمظله، ايه في مجال للمظله، في مجال انه نعمل اجتماع، نعمل مؤتمر من هالنوع مع البنوك كلها سوا، ونجي نقول يلي بده يجي يجيب مصاري من الخارج ويعمل انفستيسمون بهالبلد، شو حتكون السكيورتي تبعته ونفرجيه اياها A + B = كذا، قديش عنده ريتيرن عليها، نعمل ديليجيشنز للبنوك للمصارف، يجي مصرف لبنان يشجعنا. مؤخرا انا خبرك شغله كثير حلوه، حاكم مصرف لبنان بالفعل راح على باريس ب 5 ديسمبر، كنا نحن نستضيف
في بروفيسور بالقلب هونيك بمستشفى بومبيدو بعد ما خلص وراح الحاكم تيسر بالفعل قال انا عم حول 3000 يورو للوالده، هلا صار لي ثقه بدي احول 3000 يورو شهريا على لبنان. ما تاخذني صحيح يصير المبلغ، بس اذا فينا نعمل مهموم انه على ال5 قرارات بنروح كثير بعاد. شكرا.
اليوم سمعناه كثير بحث فاونديشن حلو بتشجع لحتى العالم ترجع توثق فينا باستاذ سلمان. كان في سؤال كذا حدا دكتور حكي عنه انه لازم كمان الدوله ترجع تحط حتى قوانين زياده لحتى تخلي الانفستر يكون مرتاح، يعني ان ترمز اوف انا بدي اسس شركه وكذا يكون البيروقراسي ليجاليتي وايز تكون ميسره اكثر سترا. هل الدوله باطار انه تبني على لما هيجي الانفستر الى براكتيكلي سبيكينج انا بدي اموري توظيفات عماله سترا اذا كنت جو تو ديتيلز، ونحن للاسف حسب تجربتنا انه القطاع بحاجه لينبنى عليه بكل النواحي، يعني ان ترمز اوف كل الديتيلز فيها ينبنى حتى قضاء حتى سترا. ذكرت بكذا لكتشر، هل في بلان فيجن حتى يقول هالمستثمر يحس حاله انه لا والله شايفين حالنا بعد 5 سنين 10 سنين انه لا نحن we want to invest، حس حالنا مرتاحين، حس حالنا انه our money are going in the right direction، مش بس كبروفيت كهيكلية الدولة. ميرسي.
ليك نحن اليوم بهذا المؤتمر كان في تركيز على موضوع جزء من الكابيتال انفستمنت بروجرام يلي بيتعلق بالقطاع الخاص وامكانيه مساهمه القطاع الخاص فيه، ولكن الشغل عم يصير على اكثر من صعيد وعلى اكثر من تراك، وامبروفينج بزنس انفايرمنت ورشه طويله عريضه شغاله، فبحط طمك يعني هيدي ممكن تعمل مؤتمر ثاني عليها، بس بقول لك انه الشغل ما بس انه في عندنا السي اي بي وجزء من السي اي بي للبرايفت انفستمنت، في جهد كثير كبير على اكثر من خط للتعاطي مع هذا الامر وامور ثانيه كمان موجوده.
يمكن بدنا نختم لانه خلص الوقت، بس بدي اقول انه مثل ما عم يقول نديم نحن اليوم هيدي اول خطوه، هيدا اطلاق ل كنا حابين اصلا نعمله اكثر انتراكتيف، يعني ناخذ المشاريع ونحكي معكم كقطاع خاص، ناخذ بارائكم والانبوت تبعكم، بس يعني صعب بوجود اشخاص يعني ناس كثار، بس هيدي اول خطوه لنعلمكم بالشيء اللي عم نشتغل عليه. رح يكون في غير مؤتمرات، رح يكون في رود شو حتى عم نحكي عنه بخارج لبنان، توقعوا انه هذا الشيء رح يكون على مدى السنين الجايه، رح يكون في حركه بهذا الموضوع، منا اليوم هي انطلاقه، منا هي نهايه.
old friend of China, to say a few words, and then His Excellency Ambassador Wang Kazhian to also say a few words on why China looks to Lebanon, what the importance of these projects are, and George will give us just a short idea of how Lebanese banks who are very highly liquid and who are looking to partner into these valid investment projects in Lebanon, like Lebanese companies that are doing major projects overseas, not just in the Gulf and Africa, can do them in our country in partnership with Chinese and other international groups. So Chairman Kassar, would you like to tell us a few words?
I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to talk to you. And I don't know, should we talk in English or...
It's up to you because the Chinese delegates and international friends have the translation, so whatever you're comfortable with. بس أنا ما بحكي عربي, so أنت بتكلم إيه؟
عربي أنا سعيد كما إنه من دواعي سروري أن أكون متواجدا في هذا المؤتمر الهام الذي يشكل خطوة أساسية نحو تعزيز قوة الاقتصاد اللبناني ورفع حجم النمو والتنمية من خلال الشراك الساحلي ما بين الدولة والقطاع الخاص اللبناني. خطوة جبارة انتظرناها منذ زمن طويل، حيث كنا واجبنا للمديرين بأهمية تحقيق الشراكة الحقيقية والمتينة بين القطاعين العام والخاص عبر تنفيذ المشاريع الاستراتيجية الهامة. هذا المؤتمر يمثل يعني الاستثمار في البنية التحتية. هذه مبادرة مهمة جدا بالنسبة إلى لبنان في هذا التوقيت بالذات. في هذا الصدد نحن نثني على هذه المبادرة لدولة رئيس مجلس الوزراء سعد الحريري وكافة الوزراء المعنيين في الحكومة، والتي تهدف إلى استعادة لبنان دوره الهام كمركز تجاري واقتصادي ومالي. يشكل برنامج الاستثمار في لبنان أكبر برنامج في تاريخ بلدنا. يعني مر علينا كثير مشاريع بالسابق أنا بشكر من فترة طويلة حتى في إعادة إعمار من سنة الستينات من بعد الحوادث اللي مرينا فيها، ولكن اليوم هذا مشروع يعني تكلفته بالغة 16 مليار دولار، منها مشاريع يتم الإعلان عنها جزئيا اليوم وبشكل كامل بدها تكون إن شاء الله بمؤتمر باريس 4 في الشهر المقبل. وهذه المشاريع الحيوية سوف تسهم في تحسين واقع البنية التحتية التي يحتاجها لبنان بشكل ضروري وأساسي، مما من شأنه رفع مستوى النمو الاقتصادي وخلق فرص عمل. وهذه المشاريع على الرغم من أهميتها باعتبارها تساهم العديد من القطاعات الحيوية الدولة والإدارة العامة إن لبنان الذي يمتاز بنظام السوق المفتوح والتنافسي وبحكم لديه قطاع مصرفي متطور وشركات لبنانية مرموقة يمكن الاعتماد عليها يستطيع أن يكون مقرا إقليميا للشركات الصينية في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وفي شمال أمريكا وتكون فقط يعني للذكر مجموعة منصبة من خلال تواجد مكتب لاعب في الصين وهو البنك العربي الوحيد الذي لديه حضور هناك لنشر أفضل العلاقات مع الجانب الصيني وإننا في هذا المجال لن ندخر جهدا من أجل أن يستفيد لبنان من شبكة العلاقات مع الصين وبالتالي استقطاب الاستثمارات الصينية والأجنبية ليعود لبنان مجددا استراتيجيا مركزا مهما للمنطقة وللعالم وشكرا لإصغائكم.
شكرا لحضرة الرئيس. سعادة السفير تحب أن تلقي كلمة أنا أؤخر.
Good afternoon. I would like to take this opportunity to talk very briefly about the bilateral relations between China and Lebanon. But first of all, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to Mr. Adnan Qassar and his brother Adil Qassar for their contribution since more than half a century to the friendship between China and Lebanon. As he has mentioned, the Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward an initiative. It's called the Belt and Road Initiative, which means to revive the Asian Silk Road and to transform it into an international platform of cooperation. Lebanon was very important link of the Asian Silk Road and is a natural partner of China in the Silk Road and Belt and Road Initiative. We are glad to see that Lebanon has managed to maintain stability and peace during the past years, especially since 2016, after you have elected a new president and government, and you are going to have your parliamentary elections. And the Chinese government strongly support the peace and stability in Lebanon, and we are glad to see that the Lebanese government has made national development plan, which is called the CIP, and we are ready to cooperate with Lebanon under the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. Last year, we have signed a memorandum of understanding between our two countries, two governments, to cooperate under this framework. We are ready, and we are ready to have more consultations with the Lebanese government on how we can cooperate on projects, especially in the infrastructure projects, using the Chinese concession loans. And at the same time, we encourage the Chinese companies to explore opportunities of cooperation with their counterparts in Lebanon. I think our priority is to have cooperation on projects that serves the interests of of both sides, and the projects which from the priority of the Lebanese side, and also the projects which, especially from the infrastructure sector, upgrading the industry in Lebanon, and also which the projects which serve the interest and the welfare of the Lebanese people. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You would think that the Lebanese government read the guidelines of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is to develop infrastructure, telecom, sectors, and all development projects, and this is what Lebanon CIP program includes. It includes all the projects that BRI looks at. So, of course, Lebanon is looking for China's participation in these projects. George, do you want to give us a quick look on what does the Lebanese banking sector and quick.
So good evening, everyone. During this day, we had many intervention and question about the role of the banks in the PPP. So I'll try to answer some of these questions, focusing on we as Fransa Bank, what we have been doing for the past years, because today some of these key issues are really a strategic business and development line for our bank, and probably some of other banks in Lebanon. So quickly, just a snapshot about Fransa Bank, who we are. So today we are one of the prime banks in Lebanon. We are founded in 1921, so it's almost 100 years now. So we have the largest network of branches in Lebanon, 124. We are present in 9 countries, including Lebanon, and we offer all type of products, going from lending to savings and investment. Largest branches, we are today number 3 in terms of net loans and advances to customers within the banking sector, and in terms of balance sheet and customer deposit, we are today number 4. So here on the map, as I said, you are present in 9 countries. Lebanon, of course, is our homeland, including countries like France since 1984, Belarus, Iraq, UAE, Ivory Coast, Cuba, Sudan, and Algeria. You have the historically where we have been started to implement our network abroad. Okay, so now we go into the PPP. As I said, Fransa Bank look at the partnership or the PPP as a real opportunity, not only for Lebanon, for the local companies, for the international companies that would like to establish themselves in Lebanon, and of course for banks, because banks will be the real partners for really addressing this situation. So how we as bank going to support this PPP program? By offering our product. So as I mentioned, we are a bank that has almost 100 years of existence, so we have built the expertise over the years. So we cover all types of sectors, real estate, industries. Now we have the oil and gas that is coming in the pipeline, trading, production, transportation. And we have been for now almost 5 years with the help of institutions like IFC, like EIB, and now EBRD coming in the pipeline, to work also on strategic and very important sectors related to energy, like wind farm project, like solar, water waste treatment, and as I said, oil and gas. We have our investment arm, Fransa Invest Bank, that is also a fully owned subsidiary that provides all the financial advisory services in addition to the private banking and investment banking. What are the products that we provide? So first is advisory to establish a company. So here we are looking at the international companies that want to establish themselves in Lebanon. So from the beginning we can help them in establishing themselves, giving them the consultancy, opening the account, and so other things. And here I would like to point out 2 documents that we have issued lately. The first one, that is the investment and business guide about Lebanon, of course, that provides for international companies what are the main issues that has to be tackled legally and operationally to establish themselves in Lebanon as a company or as a joint venture. And the second one, once we really had the PPP law approved by the parliament, so we have also published a public-private partnership, so to provide also for banks, and not for companies, international and local, some of the key features for them to know about this law. And I invite you, when you go out, we have a stand, so these publications are available for you. So we invite you to take copies of these, and if you need additional one, we are ready to give it to you. So in addition to these advisory, so we have provided the traditional, let's say, banking product for corporate and SME, because we know that within the PPP, definitely all the ecosystem will be involved. There will be small, medium, and large companies providing the services around these projects. Project finance, so also this is one issue that has been tackled. Today, we at Fransa Bank, we are building a dedicated team to work on project finance. So we are building the expertise. I guess Mr. Mullah was saying that this is something new for Lebanon, project finance, these large projects. So we would like to be one of the pillar and one of the really most, I would say, involved banks for this project and other traditional means and product for the banking sector. So, okay, we talked about how we provide the service for corporate and SME. We have a leasing company, and of course, whatever we can provide for our individual and retail clients. Here, we would like to make maybe the first public announcement is that Fransa Bank will be the first bank in the region to issue a green bond. So it will be raising funds to use the funds for a green project. And we are, let's say, very enthusiastic about this project because it will be the first in the region. And this project has been rated lately by Moody's as GB1 excellent, which is the top rating that can be given to such projects. We have developed MOUs with several sectors in the market, so with petrol station, with LAU, with Chamber of Commerce, with schools, and industrial, the Association of Industries, not only to finance, but also to create awareness, because we really believe that without awareness, this project cannot succeed. So we have to create awareness in the society, in the schools, in universities, and all the actors of the economy. One important factor, you have seen representatives from IFC, from EBRD, from EIB. All these institutions are partnering with Fransa Bank, and we are working with them very closely also to partner on this project on funding and advisory. We have a list of institutions that we have been working on for more than 20 years now, and the development of the relationship is continuing. Also, this is mainly focusing on French companies that would like to establish themselves in Lebanon. We have a partnership that we have developed with Agence Française de Développement, BPI France, and Proparco to assist French companies that would like to establish themselves in Lebanon. So this is mainly focusing on French companies. We know that many companies from France will be involved in the PPP, definitely supported by the French government. And historically, French companies are very much active in Lebanon. China, so as always, China is one of the pillars of the development of the activity at Fransa Bank. So we have established China Desk. So President Kassar has been awarded by the President Xi the highest reward from the Chinese government. We have a dedicated team working with Chinese companies, Chinese banks, because as we all know, today the role of China is increasing in our region, and we are really playing the role of bringing the Chinese companies and banks more closer to our culture, to our activity, to our project, of course, with the great help of the Embassy and His Excellency. So maybe last slide. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I think what we had wanted to say was that with this conference, what Chairman Kassar said, this is a new era, because now this is the economic revival of Lebanon. Now we can proudly say that Lebanon is the most stable country in this region. We say it proudly. What Chairman Kassar has always been calling for is to make Lebanon, to reclaim Lebanon's missed role as a center for business. We have all the components. We have the Lebanese multilingual people. We have the open economy that helped us work with China when China was under embargo. We have a very vital, robust private sector. Here, the Lebanese banks, they're a very sophisticated banking sector, ready to serve international companies, and we are very liquid. We want to do these projects with the government. We think this is a way of reducing, eliminating corruption. This is what we had done with the PPP advisory document with the High Council for Privatization, Mr. Ziad Hayek, and the World Bank, is to say, you know what, there are so many sectors we need to invest in. There are so many opportunities to work on. The World Bank gives Lebanon money, but Lebanon doesn't use it because the World Bank doesn't see any valid projects. You know, China comes and says, show us what valid projects you have for us to invest in. But then where does it start? And we think it started today. So we thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to come and speak here. Excellent job. I think a lot of the companies that were here who are partners with international companies will be relaying. I don't know, Mr. Hayek, where does it start? These companies that are with us here today, how do they get these projects? Where do they come to put in their proposal to work on these projects? What's the next step? There you go, hcb.gov.lb. Thank you. Any questions, any comments? Okay, thank you very much, and have a great evening.